is sovereignty? How do we see it? This possibility to impose the regulation on powerful. This is, I would say, one of the key elements of sovereignty. Yeah. It's not a problem to impose anything on me, on you, or on Davor. This is, I would say, any municipality can do this. Yeah. However, try to impose something on Uber. For example, Uber has a perfect service. Airbnb, perfect service. I even used it once in Rome. However, the social costs that comes with it is immense. Yeah. If you don't try to regulate it, it will deplete cities of citizens, and you will have.
It's already happening.
Yeah, it's already happening. So, for example, the good example, Vienna, as a city, regulated this.
Yeah, and even Berlin did it.
So basically, what is the trade-off? If you liberalize completely Airbnb, who is profiting? The owner of this real estate capital. So these are usually people who are owning 1, 2, 3, 4 apartments, and they are, or more, I don't know.
It's even worse, because then it generates a vicious circle where they acquire, I mean, big corporations in the real estate sector, they keep acquiring entire portions of the city and kick out the residents. It's not just the individual.
They are pushing out residents of all of the residential areas. And who is not profiting? Who is harmed? The owners of capital invested in hotels, hostels, etc., but directly the people employed in all of these sectors. So basically, we are targeting the inhabitants and the employed ones together with the owners of the capital on one side. On the other side, we have the owners of this real estate capital. And if you ask me, if we would put debate on these levels to say, okay, what do we socially evaluate as the higher value? I suppose that it would be a reasonable conclusion to say, look, we really have to take care about employed persons. We really have to take care about residents, the real residents. And we'll really have to, because if you push out residents, what will happen with the grocery stores, with supermarkets, everything is dying out.
Yep.
And then you're making.
Well, especially in the COVID again proved that, because if you had residents in certain areas, the shops would survive. But if you go to the center of Rome, which has very few residents outside of, tourists, there are very many businesses which are really struggling. Because of these imbalance, right?
Because now they are ghost cities.
Sure.
And who can fight? So who can fight? Can Italy fight Airbnb alone? I suppose not.
It's complicated though, because again, the European Union is so multi-layered, and even Italy is multi-layered. As you just mentioned, I think it's very interesting what you mentioned when you said it's also about the local authorities, for instance. We have within the European Union very different types of administrative structure. You have a very centralized one like France, for instance. You have a very decentralized one like Austria or Germany. You have something in the middle, like Italy, for instance, is an example of where it's not really a federal republic, of course, but you have some forms of devolution of competences to the regions. And the question is, who is that needs to address this? Like, who does it? Because then you have situations where Vienna, as you mentioned, or Berlin or other strong cities, they try to address the issue, and they did it quite effectively, I must say, in their own ways. But then what happens to the others? So this also creates like the fact that there's no centralized or EU level, if you will, constraint in this sense. It creates a lot of inequalities, and we go back to what Davor was saying, like contradictions and inequalities within the same region, within the same state, and ultimately within the European Union itself, right? So I don't know. I suppose that this is a part of the conversation that we should have. And I think just to go back to what you were saying, okay, how do we do this? Like, why do we, for instance, when you see the rebates and you see, the net contributions and stuff, like, why do we only talk about who contributes more money and we don't talk about the, benefits that they get out of it? I think this is also connected to the question of narratives. So it's really about changing the narrative, which is very powerful. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. Like what you tell your electorate if it's credible, what you're saying, the story you're telling, even I'm not saying it must be true, it must be credible, that can change everything. The reason why I think we missed out on many opportunities, many problems during the Eurozone crisis was this wrong narrative. It was all about the profligate Southerners. Mm-hmm. And these stereotypes are still perpetuated in many countries. There was, I don't know if you saw the Netherlands, there was a famous magazine, I don't remember which magazine, which was portraying Italians like, the Dolce Vita, staying there, drinking cappuccino, where the, hardworking Dutch were subsidizing them. I think the problem is really, is deep, right? And it's about public opinion, and it's about what makes you win.
I've said the acronym PIGS. So basically, the usage of this acronym really says all that you need to say about how the southern countries were treated.
Absolutely. But then, if I may interject, interestingly, on the other hand, what you see within the European Union, and I think it's also perhaps part of the problem, or at least a piece of the puzzle, is that the PIGS, or the peripheral countries, or the southern countries, I mean, if they join forces, they would be very powerful. But they rarely do that. They seldom do that. And this is also interesting. And this happened with the Eurozone. Everyone was worried, concerned about not being considered like Greece. Spain didn't want to coalesce with Italy. And this is like, there's a history. And even now, they are very careful about how they shape their fronts and alliances. And I suspect there's more to this than just, again, pure economic interests at play. There's more.
Of course, it's always multidimensional. It's never a single.
It's narratives. It's how you are perceived. For instance, there's another issue. Like I was reading this morning a commentary on the European Stability Mechanism and why Italy doesn't want to use it. I mean, and for instance, there was a point of disagreement between Merkel and Conte. Is like, if you need, like, Merkel was okay, matter of fact, if you need it, use it, right? If you need it, you're going to use it. Why don't you want to use it? And the question is not matter of fact at all. It's a matter of perception. It's because this mechanism is so controversial domestically in Italy, and if the government used it, it would be attacked by the opposition, and it's being polarized. The discussion was being politicized so much that it's not about the thing in itself. It's about how it is perceived by the public opinion, by political antagonists, and all that. So I think we really need to pay attention to this dimension if you want to understand what's going on. Because if we just look at the numbers and even the schemes, which are of course important, I think we miss many other interesting points.
Davor, you wanted to add something, sorry, or
No, just to go back to this one moment when Cecilia mentioned that the EU is a kind of the world, a micro version of the world, or can be used as an image of what's happening much more generally. And I think it's a useful way of thinking about the EU and by the same token about these contradictions in the whole world. Of course, still Europe and the EU is much better off than the rest of the world on the average, but the image does capture these contradictions. So we have poor countries, we have rich parts, we have countries within the EU with high levels of corruption, and those that are much more transparent in many ways. We have countries where different ideologies operate to the extent that they actually mutually clash. Then we have also this role of big businesses that you addressed previously, that challenge political structures both at the EU level and at the national level. So I think that the major battle will be, and maybe still is already, will be an ideological one. Because and that I think is what also Cecilia kind of hinted at when she mentioned these narratives. Because very often people I think make a common mistake, both in the political realm and generally, thinking that there is a real life. There are real forces at work, realpolitik, and then you always need to respond. There are even pretty absurd theories about that, and you just need to respond to them, and it's always based on rational calculation and of interest, what you benefit, what you lose, and stuff like that. But the problem is, and economic forces are very often cited as one of those merciless, objective forces that there is nothing much you can do about it, but just try to, as much as you can, influence them again through same rational procedures. The problem is that none of these things is just out there objectively existing, whatever that means. It's all very closely linked with certain ideological narratives and certain decisions that are again informed by other ideological narratives. So approaching the very real, really functioning economic forces cannot be done in an ideologically neutral way. So that is a very important thing, I think, to stress and to understand, because when we realize that, we then see that everything that is generally presented to the population as this is the situation, what actually it means is this is what the situation looks like from this ideological perspective, but there are other ideological perspectives, and the future can also look very differently. So what we are basically seeing in Europe, I think, nowadays and already for some time, is this clash between some of these contradictory ideological narratives and then very real political and economic interests and of course power games. So there are big businesses that have their interests, and of course they would, in an ideal case scenario, love to have obedient and very technocratic governments that could deliver whatever is in their interests, whether it related to taxes, whether the working environment, lowering wages of workers and stuff like that, less protection, social welfare, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we have political elites that are trying to operate and navigate within this complex world. Imagine one even mid-sized or smaller European country, if they want to kind of have any reasonable policy and try to make something beneficial for their citizens, which is of course what most governments don't do because they have their own class interests. But that aside, just as a theoretical model, they are already jammed in between their own domestic political struggle. How to survive there. If it's any kind of meaningful democratic system, you need to get the next elections. When you need to get to win next elections, you cannot invest in long-term projects. So you need to focus on the issues that will get you elected in a couple of years or 4 years from now. Then that's just one level. Another level is, of course, pressures from big banks and debt that you have, and the fact that any of the major corporations can crash many of these countries whenever they want it. Then you have the EU level. So so I'm saying this to illustrate that although all of this looks like dealing with very real forces, and it is, these forces are very real, still the way we conceptualize them and respond to them depends on the ideological narratives that we will choose to believe in, and we will actually think through or not. So whether they're going to be elaborate and meaningful ideological narratives or nonsensical, that's a different matter. But I think the biggest battle here will be between some kind of a globalized digital version of a neoliberal narrative that will be intertwined with all these nice words about democracy and human rights that will be more and more emptied of their real content, of course, including welfare state, and alternative ideological positions that would try, we can call it a new left or something else, that would try to find way out of these contradictions, how to actually nowadays have certain level of efficiency, not diminishing democracy, how to have a high level of human rights and welfare state in a competitive world, where you have other states that are much more authoritarian and much more efficient in fixing many things. So I think Europe again has can have this role, important role in thinking together with other places and other people of new ways in which human dignity, essentially human freedoms, can be reaffirmed in the situation where everything actually seems to be turning against.
In this respect, Davor, I would only ask for a certain cautious, basically, that you touch this topic, and I must say I do have a bit of allergy on leaving.
That's why
every time that we mention that human rights and freedoms are somehow these empty concepts or becoming empty concepts, it seems to me that we are somehow leaving the battlefield. And for me, the concepts of human rights, freedoms, dignity, this is the main battlefield. The millions have been burned in crematoriums because there were no human rights. There was no concept of freedom that we were depending. So basically, we should not let it go. We should not give it away. So basically, and I would like that we reaffirm that this social liberal left is reaffirming freedom as its central concept, as its key concept, and not to give it away without battle to the neoliberals.
I
know that you were not. I would just like to sharpen this sense, because sometimes we can be understood wrongly.
Let me sharpen it even more. Then, precisely when I criticize the process of emptying these concepts of their real content, I'm precisely trying to reaffirm them and actually rethink them so that we actually reestablish some real meaning and real values behind them. Because it's not only that sometime in the past millions were burnt in concentration camps. It's that millions are suffering nowadays. And it's sometimes called, let's say, promotion of democracy and human rights. Yeah. So that's the problem. That's what I mean by emptying it. So Europe is praising itself and the European Union about human rights, democracy, values, and then leaves and has a policy, organized one. So not accidentally that actually thousands of people are dying, and not to mention other interventions in other areas that indirectly the EU contributed to actually misplacement of millions of people. So like that's what I mean. It's not leaving the battlefield, but actually getting serious about what are the values we need to defend and establish the real content to them instead of empty ideological talking.
Can I jump in? Because I think this is a very, very crucial topic, really, the one you're addressing. I think that in a way, so it's an ideological battle for sure, and narratives are also connected to ideologies, of course. In a way, I feel that it was relatively easy to promote human rights at a time where you had such blatant example of violations of human rights. Okay, you're talking about the absolute evil, okay, the Nazi regime, or the mass violations of human rights. It was very easy in a way to say, well, we stand for human rights and we stand for freedom and democracy, which, by the way, comes hand in hand with free market, but that's another dimension to the debate. Now, the problem is that today we still stick, as Davor said, we still stick to the same devices in terms of, rhetoric device. We still stick to the same narratives, but these narratives are really been hollowing. They've been hollowed out. They're becoming empty. And this is because, again, we always try to point at the external enemy. So the problem is China. Now, for instance, just to give an idea, I've heard so many speeches and addresses and debates where political leaders of, both national EU level, they were pointing to China, criticizing. At the same time, you are supporting Turkey. What's going on within NATO, which is even a big, another big issue. But even to come closer to us, like even geographically and in terms of time, like think about this, again, the COVID fund, funds that were put in place as schemes. And the fact that, for instance, a big issue was conditionality for states like Hungary or Poland, where you honestly have, many scholars of democracy have started to say, well, Hungary is not a democracy anymore. You got a competitive authoritarian system, maybe, or but there's a debate, right?
Orban said it basically more or less between the lines.
You know, I mean, we know about the situation, and yet there's not been any serious scrutiny, even though now, again, with the schemes, there is some kind of conditionality, but it's not as strong as other, like some member states would have liked it to be. Right. So I think it's a matter of looking inside, like this self-perception as being automatically, you know, spearheading democracy without realizing that democracy and freedoms and all that, it's a path and it's a process rather than, okay, we are there, that's it. You know, now we can turn elsewhere and we can teach the others to be democratic. We saw a lot of that with the Black Lives Matter.